It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're in Sacramento today, and we are joined by the man, the myth. He is Paul Mitchell. He is the president of Redistricting Partners, as well as the vice president of Political Data Inc., PDI. Let's get into it, talk some redistricting. Who would have thunk mid-decade that we may need to be redrawing lines here in the state of California? Explain.
Yeah, well, mid-decade redistricting, the whole idea of it is kind of sounds like a disaster.
Right.
It brings back these memories of the legislators in Texas
Right.
taking midnight flights to
Right.
leave the state so they could deny
Right.
a quorum. And always shenanigans. Whenever you see mid-decade redistricting, there's some kind of trick being played, generally partisanship at stake. What we're seeing actually is something precipitated by the Arizona legislature. The Arizona legislature wasn't happy with their commission,
Right.
which predated ours and was kind of the format that ours was created after, and they took it to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court has had its hearing. We'll wait to see what they rule.
And essentially what the Arizona Republicans have been saying is that under the U.S. Constitution, the legislature must be the one that draws the boundaries.
Yeah.
And, I used to be a lawyer, you know that. And if you look at the wording of the Constitution, it does say legislature. It doesn't say legislature or its designee. It doesn't say the people. It says the legislature. And so prognosticators much smarter than me believe that the Supreme Court may strike down any commission in which the legislature is cut out.
Yeah. So the legislature was actually involved in the first ballot measure to create the commission, but then remember it was a second ballot measure to extend that to Congress.
That's the key.
And the legislature's role in drawing congressional lines is very, very, very limited. They have one very tiny role in the selection of commissioners where they can veto a few commissioners here and there. But the argument that Arizona was using was, hey, we're not involved at all. In some states, the legislature appoints the commissioners, so they're involved. In other states, the legislature actually passes the final plan, so they're involved in those states. But in Arizona and California, there's no involvement. The legislature, the commission can draw the lines, pass them, and the legislature gets no say, and so theoretically,
Now,
they're not involved
if
enough.
the Supreme Court rules against Arizona, likely our commission would fall. But the key, though, is we have the commission drawing lines for state elected officials, meaning state assembly, state senate, BOE, and Congress. Would the state lines fall?
No, the state lines would stay intact. The state lines, legislative and Board of Equalization, would be maintained, and it seems as though the congressional lines would be the only ones in question.
So let's talk about that. What happens? I mean, Paul, in the middle of the decade, in 2016, with the presidential race going on, are we going to see our legislature being essentially forced to draw lines?
Well, we could be in a position where the lines need to be drawn by somebody before 2016,
right?
Before those elections. And if that's the case, then the legislature should and probably would take on that responsibility. There are some things that are going to be the same drawing these lines and those lines. One is the population of the state has grown, but by law, they're going to use the 2010 numbers.
They have to?
They have to. They have to use the 2010 census numbers to draw the lines. But there are things that have changed, most notably the federal Section 5 requirement. The commission, when the commission drew the lines, they were very concerned that the Department of Justice would essentially veto their lines, and then the courts would have to end up drawing, and it would be a big mess. So the commission drew the lines by drawing a number of Central Valley districts first, and then drawing the rest of the state afterwards.
Because it was those districts that were still under the purview of Section 5.
Exactly. And so in order to make sure that their plan actually became law someday, they drew those parts first. That really changes the flexibility that you had in drawing lines.
And let's remember, Section 5, though, was essentially by the Supreme Court. We don't have to comply with it anymore.
No, yeah, Section 5 is gone, so there's no need to get federal approval for whatever lines the legislature draws now. And so there's a lot more flexibility that could happen in how those lines are drawn. At the same time, a Democratic legislature, a Democratic governor, the commission lines were actually very good for Democrats, and there were some Democrats that held on to their congressional seats this last election. Maybe some Democrats that folks thought, were going to lose their seats. In fact, on election night, about 3 or 4 Democrats were losing and came back with the late ballots. So there might not be that much of a land grab from Democrats.
But why wouldn't there be? I mean, think about it. The Republicans in 2012, if you add up all the Democratic votes for House and all the Republican votes for the House, the Republicans were down 1.4 million.
Yeah.
Yet the Democrats weren't in the majority. Why? Because the Republicans drew their lines more effectively. In states where they were in control. It just seems like politics 101. If you're in control, the spoils of victory.
Yeah, but the spoils of victory, if the Democrats have lost those 4 seats, then they would use that as an opportunity to win those seats back or maybe even gain one more. And there might be an opportunity for them maybe in the Central Valley or somewhere else to
you've seen what
reinforce
happened
one.
in some of these states. I mean, again, and I'm not taking a partisan position, but some of these line drawings by Republican legislatures in the Midwest and the South, I mean, pure brilliance. They compact so many Democrats in one district, 80% in one district, that it's more efficient.
Yeah.
So the voting is more efficient, and that's why these Republicans are able to take seats that you'd think, if you look at the population and the percentages of partisanship, the Republicans shouldn't have that many seats.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Well, I think that there's going to be this competing force of incumbent legislators that are Democrats saying, I won last year by 6 points. I need more Democrats. And other Democrats around the state saying, I need just a little bit more cushion. And all that push from incumbents to try to get a little bit more cushion would be pushing against this idea of getting a seat
Carving
that's a new seat
right.
for somebody we don't know who it is.
Let's talk about voter turnout.
Yeah.
So I live in Los Angeles County. I live in Los Angeles City. We recently had an election, several city council races on the ballot, community college races on the ballot. The turnout was abysmal, isn't strong enough.
Yeah.
It was so abhorrent that it's almost hard to say that Los Angeles City is acting as a republic, as a democracy, as a Republican form of democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, like 8%. I mean, what's happening here?
Well, there's a number of things happening. One is there's a large group of the electorate that just isn't participating in these elections. They'll participate in the presidential race, and they won't participate in local or even gubernatorial elections. And what's important isn't just the raw number, low turnout, but how different that makes the electorate from the people that are being served by the people who get elected. I'll tell you something striking.
Please.
Chinatown. It's very high Asian population right in the middle of LA. And Sylmar, extremely high Latino population up in the San Fernando Valley. You know what Chinatown and Sylmar have in common?
No voter turnout?
In both of those, the majority voters were white in both neighborhoods.
We know that can't, demographically.
No, the average voter in both of those communities was a older white homeowner. And you drive to Sylmar, you drive to Chinatown.
Right.
That's not what you're seeing represented in the people that are being, served by those elected officials.
These ethnic groups voting? Is it that they don't want to get involved in government? Maybe they're immigrants, and you don't vote in El Salvador, you don't vote in China, you don't get involved.
No, there's a couple different things. One is we can say Latino turnout is low as an example. But Latino turnout is also young people turnout. The Latinos that are citizens in Los Angeles that are eligible to vote are registering at a lower number, and they're turning out a lower number because you have this combined factors. They're more likely to be living in apartments, more likely to be moving every 6 months or 18 months, more likely to be young. And so there's this combination of factors.
I must ask you, though, about 2 initiatives, essentially, that passed in Los Angeles City. Those initiatives have moved the Los Angeles City elections to on-cycle. They're going to be
even-numbered election years.
Even-number election years. A lot of interest came out against it late, but they passed overwhelming.
3 to 1.
3 to 1. What do you make of that?
I did the LA Unified School District redistricting for them, and when we were doing that redistricting, we definitely did a lot of looking at how the populations fluctuated from on-cycle gubernatorial, presidential, and then down to local elections. So what I think you're going to have is you're going to have more voters in those elections. You're going to have potentially some drop-off, like people not participating in those city council races, but still more votes being cast in the city council, LA Unified, LA Community College District races than in the current structure.
Were you surprised by the margin?
I was surprised by the margin.
Yeah, as was I.
One thing that's really interesting about it, you were asking the most high propensity voters in all the city of LA if they want to allow low propensity voters to start participating.
He's Paul Mitchell, I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.